Friends of VisualPolitik, the world has changed. And no, I'm not referring to the coronavirus. In this video, we will talk about the revolution that the energy sector has experienced over the past decade. More specifically, the dramatic boom in liquefied natural gas, LNG. And also, how the fracking revolution has changed the balance of power that is always behind the trade in energy resources.
In the past, pundits and politicians claimed that America was running out of oil and natural gas. They were saying it 10 years ago, 5 years ago. I was hearing it all the time. They said the United States would never again be an energy powerhouse. They said that Americans would have to learn to get by with much, much, much less. But you proved them wrong.
Fracking has caused the United States to boost its natural gas production, to the extent that since 2017, the land of Uncle Sam has been fully self-sufficient in terms of providing for its own energy consumption. In fact, they even have enough to be in a position to export it. Of course, because of its geographical location, the question is, to who? Because the United States only has two neighbours. To the north, Canada, a country that is also self-sufficient in gas, and that, in fact, has exported large quantities of gas to the west coast of the United States for decades. And then, to the south, there's Mexico, which already receives more than half of all the gas it consumes by a gas pipeline from the United States. So, where can they flog the surplus? Because the truth is, the United States still has a lot, and I mean a lot of gas left over. And that's precisely why, in order to look at markets in other continents, you definitely need to consider LNG, liquefied natural gas. As many as you will know, natural gas is traditionally exported through pipelines, but there is one major obstacle to this way of transporting gas: the oceans. Underwater pipelines exist, but establishing an underwater pipeline for thousands and thousands of miles and at a great depth is a terribly expensive and technically very complicated undertaking. So in order to be able to carry out trade between far-flung countries, the only real alternative that exists is precisely liquefied natural gas. In a way similar to this technology, this way of transporting energy has a huge advantage over pipelines. It simply manages to reach markets that are impossible to reach with a pipeline. And the case of the United States makes this very clear. It is the best example of how global gas markets have changed over the past decade. But don't think this is an isolated case. Even countries with long traditions as gas exporters are also targeting this new method. Check it out.
Russia gas strategy prioritized liquid natural gas with a more modest role for Gazprom.
So the United States and Russia, but also Australia, Qatar, Nigeria, the world is pushing hard for LNG. Check out this chart about new liquefaction capability. The blue that represents the world stands out more in recent years than the red representing the United States. Check it out. And of course, if we're talking about gas, we're talking about money too. Look at what Fatih Birol, director of the International Energy Agency, says.
LNG investments hit record of $50 billion in 2019, IEA chief.
Do you see that? $50 billion in a single year. The global LNG market is moving more banknotes around the world's capitals than Money Heist. So, the question we can ask ourselves is, why is there this growing interest for liquefied natural gas in the global energy market? What changes could it cause in the international relations of the major powers? Well, today on VisualPolitik, we are going to play teacher and answer these questions. But first, as always, let's take a look at some history.
Denver.
The technology to liquefy natural gas was not developed until the 1960s, but the revolution that LNG has brought to markets has really come along and been developed in the last decade. In 10 years, the volume of liquefied natural gas marketed worldwide has doubled, an accelerated trend since 2016 when Australia, Russia, and especially the United States have literally flooded the global energy market with liquefied natural gas. And as we told you in previous videos, fracking has caused the United States to increase its natural gas production by 80% since 2005. That is, it produces today almost twice as much gas as it did just 15 years ago. Something that explains why the United States has not only managed to supply its own demand since 2017, but why it has enough to consider exporting. My friends, this revolution has been such that it has completely changed the business strategies of energy companies in the United States. Infrastructure that had been designed to import huge amounts of gas had to receive investments of more than $100 billion to be transformed into export facilities. Almost overnight, the goal became to liquefy natural gas. That is, cool it to minus 162 degrees Celsius to convert it into a liquid state so that it could be exported by huge methane cargo ships. Of course, when you have merchandise ready for sale, there is only one thing missing: the buyer. So who do you think has been the aggressive salesman responsible for placing the US LNG on the market? Well, none other than President Donald Trump. We all know his tactics. First, he threatens to impose tariffs, both left and right, and then the negotiations begin. In 2018, he threatened to start a transatlantic trade war with the European Union. And what did he get? Well, look at what the then president of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, promised in exchange for the United States not imposing tariffs on European cars.
That was my main intention, to propose to come down to zero tariffs on industrial goods. We've decided to strengthen our cooperation on energy. The EU will build more terminals to import liquefied natural gas from the US.
And as we usually say on this channel, no sooner said than done. US gas went from representing a meager 5% of all liquefied natural gas imported in 2018 to reaching a 15% share a year later in 2019. Statistics don't lie. And those were more or less the figures when the coronavirus arrived. All of this came together in 2020. On one hand, we found that Europe had had its gas warehouses at an occupancy level of 60% compared to 40% that was the usual level. Add to that the productive lag that all economies have suffered because of COVID-19, and what do we find? Well, a market that has had to say, enough, I don't need any more liquefied natural gas for now. And this is a problem. It is a problem because you know that President Trump treats his allies according to his business interests. What do you want to buy from me? Oh, you're my best friend. What? You're not buying anything? You'll be sorry. And the truth is, I don't think he likes to see how Europe is cancelling orders for US LNG, even if it's simply because Europe's demand doesn't warrant more gas right now. Well, it turns out that even in the worst moments of the coronavirus crisis, there was a backlog of methane cargo ships in European waters, looking desperately for a gas holder to unload at.
LNG tankers build up around virus hit Europe as crisis abates in Asia.
In any case, despite good sales data to Europe in 2019, we must not lose sight of the fact that the country to which the United States exports the most LNG is none other than South Korea. We're talking about the country that is the third most dependent on this fuel on the entire planet. Its appetite for gas just keeps growing, and that is surely something Trump will like. Because, my friends, the truth is that in the coming years, the United States will compete face to face with great exporting powers like Qatar and Australia. For example, US market share in South Korea will double after this agreement it signed with BP.
Through this long-term contract, the imports are expected to surge to 7.9 million tons by 2025, with an increased portion of 22.8%. We expect to see the expansion of energy trade between the two countries, the diversification of the natural gas adoption, and the stability of natural gas supply. Industry Ministry of South Korea.
And my friends, what happens in November? In November 2020, elections. There are elections in the United States, and no one dares say who will eventually sit in the Oval Office. What is certain though, and I mean a sure thing, is that once we have overcome the bump we are currently experiencing with the coronavirus, the US liquefied natural gas will continue its export boom around the world. We're as sure of this as we are of Trump continuing to use gas imports in his peculiar way of doing politics for as long as he stays in the White House.
Big news! As I promised 2 weeks ago, the first shipment of LNG has just left the Cameron LNG export facility in Louisiana. Not only have thousands of jobs been created in the USA, we're shipping freedom and opportunity abroad. Donald Trump.
Freedom and opportunities beyond its borders? What on earth is Trump talking about? Well, actually, the truth is that it's just a meaningful statement, because if there is any hostage in this episode, it is Europe, which has been held to ransom by Russian gas for decades. So the question is, will Vladimir Putin let the US liquefied natural gas calmly reach the shores of the old continent? In the beginning, we told you that he had a strategy. So, where are the battles fought in Europe? Well, the same places they always are. Listen up.
Berlin. Always Berlin.
The EU bloc of countries is the third largest consumer of natural gas after the United States and Russia. Of course, unlike in these two countries, gas production within the European community has been in decline for years. Today, it barely meets 15% of Europe's total consumption. So obviously, that means we have to bring in gas from outside countries. However, of the 27 partners, it is Germany that has the biggest demand by far. It accounts for around 24% of all European gas imports. How does Germany do this? Well, basically, 100% arrives by pipeline and 0% per methane vessel. And of course, when you know that half the gas that hits Germany comes from Russia, then you're not so surprised that when Putin invades Crimea, no one in Berlin lifts a finger. And the worst is that this dependence on Russian gas will only increase more and more as Germany has vowed to dispense with nuclear power from 2023 onwards. So, Germany needs to diversify its energy sources at all costs if it does not want to be subjected almost entirely to Moscow's wishes. And the warnings to Berlin have not stopped ringing. Look at this latest one.
Germany needs more LNG to complement renewables, IEA says.
The European Union reached a record level of liquefied natural gas imports in 2019. That is why it is very striking that Germany, Europe's largest consumer of gas, has not yet opted for this type of energy. And something that is even more striking, while it has a couple of projects underway, its main energy plan is centered on a new pipeline with Russia, the Nord Stream 2. And, my friends, both the United States and those who rule in Brussels have strongly opposed this project. Why? Because they don't want to increase Europe's energy dependence on the Kremlin. Before we move on, here is another chart. As you can see, until the coronavirus arrived, we had an expanding market in Europe. And yes, as the sky blue bar shows, American liquefied natural gas had burst onto the scene dramatically. But, as you can see in the purple segment, Russia is unwilling to easily cede its market share. Novatek is the Russian company that is betting the most on this technology. So Putin has realized the competition that other countries' liquefied natural gas brings to the Gazprom pipelines and has already launched its new strategy. If the Europeans want liquefied natural gas, they'll have liquefied natural gas, but it will also be Russian. And the truth is that Russian gas has a huge advantage over US gas, its price tag. Because one of the main elements influencing the price of liquefied natural gas is precisely transport costs. Basically, the shorter distance to be covered by methane vessels, the lower the bill. And let's not forget that European economies need to be competitive, and that in this respect, the cost of energy remains one of the main factors to be taken into account. So as you can see, it's going to be very, very difficult for the European Union to give up Russian gas. Even more so if we consider news like this.
Fluxy's Novatek to build German LNG terminal by 2022.
In case you're wondering, yes, this news means that Germany will receive even more Russian gas. But what will happen to the Germans if they increase their dependence on Russian gas? But let's just wait one moment, because Russian liquefied natural gas doesn't just look to the west. Routes to the east are also viable. Melting in the Arctic and icebreakers have made navigation to the Pacific Ocean possible for more and more days a year. It's one of those catch-22 situations where burning gas allows you to sell more gas at the expense of the planet. But once there, Russian gas has access to the continent that has the largest appetite for natural gas. More importantly, where more banknotes are spent on this energy source. Take a look at this.
Tokyo.
Friends, if we're talking about liquefied natural gas, we're basically talking about Asia. This continent is the destination of almost 70% of all liquefied gas traded worldwide, and Japan has been the largest importer on the planet by far for decades. Just so you get an idea, Japan alone imports more liquefied natural gas than the entire European Union. Demand accelerated very strongly after the 2011 tsunami that caused the Fukushima disaster and the consequent nuclear blackout. Of course, things have changed a little bit since 2014. Gas consumption in Japan has not only not grown since then, but it's actually fallen by 13%. So why has demand dropped? Because several nuclear power plants are back online, and because Japan faces two closely related problems: the stagnation of its economy and the unstoppable aging of its population. In any case, although Japanese interest in liquefied natural gas has shrunk, the methane tankers have continued to sail at full throttle through the Pacific. I'm sure that by taking a look at this chart, you'll understand perfectly why. In this chart, you can see the effects of supply and demand in all its splendor. Higher prices for Asia, represented by the yellow and orange lines. High demand, limited production, and reduced supply. As you can see, there's a lot of difference between these Asian lines and the red ones, representing the Henry Hub Index, which marks the price of gas in the United States. Since the fracking revolution, the red line has stopped descending. In other words, selling gas in Asia is much more lucrative than selling gas in the United States. But, as we've said, Japanese demand has been in decline since 2004. However, in the same time period, liquefied natural gas's international trade has grown by 45%, and imports from Asia have grown by 36%. So the question is, which country is pushing Asian demand? Well, it'll come as a surprise to none of you that it's probably the country you're all thinking about. Look at what energy consultants from Wood Mackenzie have forecast.
China to surpass Japan as leading LNG importer by 2022.
The truth is that this forecast could be brought forward and become a reality earlier this year due to the economic consequences of the coronavirus. In any case, what there is no doubt about is that the Asian giant's awakening has caused China to become an enormous natural gas consumer. In 10 years, it has tripled its consumption. And if we're talking only about liquefied gas, then its imports have multiplied tenfold. By the way, take a note here. Australia has been doing great business with all of this, a country that supplies roughly half of all the liquefied natural gas that China imports. But let's not get distracted. My friends, the most interesting thing is that Chinese imports have not yet peaked. In the 5 years prior to the coronavirus, they had been growing at 30% per year until the impact of the pandemic set in. So with these numbers, it's clear. China is the key market that will be demanding liquefied natural gas the most during the coming years. And this should give us something to think about. Maybe, just maybe, there's someone out there who should put their ideas about trade wars behind them if they want to avoid a 25% tariff on their gas. Look, for example, at what happened when Beijing granted tariff exemptions to several Chinese importers.
April 7th, 2020. US restarts LNG exports to China after 1 year break.
Friends, the so-called Phase 1 trade agreement locked China into a commitment to buy US energy products worth more than $50 billion. However, it still maintains tariffs on US liquefied natural gas, which makes Chinese imports dependent on exemptions like the one we have just pointed out. In other words, if Trump wants the United States to become that great liquid natural gas export energy power he dreams of, he knows full well that his companies can't miss out on the world's largest market. Will Trump be willing to backtrack in the trade war? That is where we will leave it. So, we really hope you enjoyed this video. Please hit like if you did, and don't forget to subscribe for brand new videos. If you hit the little alarm button down there, you'll get an update whenever we release one. Also, don't forget to check out our friends at the Reconsider Media podcast. They provided the vocals in this episode that were not my dulcet tones. Finally, this channel is possible because of Patreon and our patrons on that platform. Please consider joining them and supporting our mission of providing independent political coverage. And as always, I'll see you next time.
If you want to learn more about politics and world affairs and hear some more of my lovely voice, come check out the Reconsider podcast, where we don't do the thinking for you. Find Reconsider at www.reconsidermedia.com or on Apple or Google Play or your favorite podcatcher.